Snowboarding can be a dangerous sport, and these three idiots are about to learn that lesson the hard way. They're trapped 50 feet in the air on the side of a freezing cold mountain, with only hours left before they all freeze to death. And that's only if something worse doesn't get to them first. We're here to break down the mistakes made, what you should do, and how to survive the ski lift of death in Frozen. So this ski trip is about to turn into a disaster. It's ski season at a resort somewhere in the mountains, and these three friends are getting ready for their last day on the hill. They're waiting for an old lady who has a crush on Joe to take over the lift. That way, they can get in without having to buy their own tickets, but for some reason, it looks like she's not showing up. Sure enough, the next worker is a guy they've never even seen before, but Dan here still has a plan. He wants his girlfriend Parker to charm the guy into letting them in without a pass, but she isn't sure if she has what it takes. Parker reluctantly goes up to the guy and starts trying to work her magic, but it's obvious that he really doesn't give a damn about her problems. Pushing through, she comes up with a whole story about how she's on a trip with her girlfriends and lost her credit card, so she only has enough cash to pay for one ticket. He's not buying it at first, and the guys notice that it's not going well. That's when Joe starts complaining that Dan here even brought her along, saying how he spends too much time with his girlfriend. Dan gets a little offended, but they quickly squash the beef, and that's when Parker comes walking over with some good news. The lifty agreed to let them in. He's a little annoyed when he finds out that she gave him the full $100, but she waves them over and they all get in line. The lifty notices right away that her girlfriends were actually guy friends all along, but he keeps the money and lets them go without any trouble. To them, it seems like they just scored a great deal, but soon they're going to realize that coming to this mountain was their biggest mistake.
Okay, these three might think that they're in for a fun day, but the truth is that their lives are already in danger, and they just don't know it yet. Forking over their last 100 V-Bucks to a guy they hardly know is bad already, because nothing's stopping him from pocketing the cash and kicking them off the mountain. But there are other reasons why getting your tickets the legit way could save your life. Resorts don't just use tickets to make sure that only paying customers get on the hill. They also use them as a way to keep track of how many people are on the mountain. Since they didn't get their tickets from the front desk, there's going to be no record that they were ever on the slopes, and if something bad happens, nobody will be coming to save them. Whenever you're doing these kinds of extreme outdoor activities, it's always important to let people know what your plans are. That way, they'll be able to send help if you run into any trouble. And this could mean the difference between life and death. The mountain might seem like a fun and safe place when it's business as usual, but you have to remember that this is nature we're talking about, and nature doesn't around. Since they rely on cold weather, ski resorts almost always operate under below freezing temperatures during the peak season, and this can regularly drop below zero depending on certain factors. Even with the proper gear, the human body just isn't prepared to deal with these kind of conditions in an emergency scenario, and unless they're trained survivalists, they could wind up dead from just the cold in a matter of hours. If they're not careful, the group can easily get lost, either by wandering too far from the trail or by getting caught in a sudden storm that makes it impossible to find their way back to shelter. And since they didn't buy tickets, no one will be coming to look for them. This gets even more dangerous when you add the chance of injury, because one broken ankle could lead to a life-threatening situation if they can't get back to safety. And on top of that, these mountains are full of dangerous wildlife like bears, wolves, and mountain lions that could see them as an easy target. So with that being said, the good news is that keeping themselves safe is pretty simple. Right now, all they need to do is stick together and stay on the trail surrounded by other people, and they should be fine. I'd be careful about exploring anywhere off the beaten path though, because as we're about to see, these three don't exactly make the smartest decisions.
Riding up the raft, Dan thanks his girlfriend for getting them tickets, and she says that it's nice of him to call her babe for once, pointing out that he isn't romantic enough in their relationship. Feeling like a third wheel, Joe cracks a joke about girlfriends always being a pain in the ass, but Dan only laughs it off, trying not to get caught up in the middle. They bust his chops for still riding skis when all the cool kids these days are on snowboards, but he sticks with his choice, arguing that snowboards are just a trend. Just then, the lift comes up to a sudden stop and Parker starts getting worried because of the height, but her friends have seen this hundreds of times before. Treating it like a joke, Joe jumps in the chair and causes the whole thing to shake, but pretty soon, he's not going to be laughing at all. Dan tells her not to worry, promising that the chairs are actually very safe, and soon enough, the lift finally starts back up. When they finally make it to the top of the hill, Dan makes his girlfriend put on a helmet for safety, even though she thinks that it looks silly. While they're getting ready, Joe notices a pretty lady struggling to get into her bindings, and rushes over to offer up a helping hand. He helps the girl get back on her feet, and it looks like he might be getting somewhere when her boyfriend comes along and shoves him down into the snow. Yelling at him to calm down, she introduces herself and apologizes for the attack, thanking Joe for helping her out. The three of them take off down the first run, with Parker here doing her best just to keep up. The couple seems like they're having a good time, but Joe starts getting more frustrated every time the girl slows them down. After skiing for a while, they stop for some pizza down at the lodge. While Parker's grabbing a drink, the boys start making plans for their next trip, and Joe mentions how he wants to get off the bunny slope at least once before they leave. She happens to walk up just as he's talking that and he's immediately embarrassed for getting caught. Feeling bad, he apologizes and promises that she isn't holding them back. Parker says that she's had enough for the day anyway, but Dan won't give her the keys to the locker because he doesn't want her to give up just yet. Convincing her, they finally agree to go back out for a few more runs, but what they don't know is that this run is going to be their last. Outside, they end up bumping into that girl Shannon again, who tells Joe that she and her boyfriend officially broke up. She and her friends are coming back to hit the slopes again next weekend, and the two of them agree to meet up. But Joe walks away without sealing the deal. At the last second, he turns around and asks for her number. The only problem is he doesn't have his phone or anything to write it down, so he has to do his best to remember it the old-fashioned way. When they get to the lift, they're annoyed to find the worker already closing things down for the night. Dan's frustrated that they didn't get their money's worth, but the guy blames it on the bad weather, saying there's nothing he can do. Promising that they only want to go one more time, they eventually annoy the guy enough that he finally breaks down, warning them to be fast or else they'll all get in trouble. But the truth is that these three are already as good as dead. As they're going up, another worker comes along and tells the lifty that the boss needs to see him right away. Leaving the keys, he rushes over to the office and lets his buddy take over, saying how there's still 3 riders left before they can close. They're making plans for what to eat on the drive home when the lifty here notices 3 other riders coming down and shuts down the whole lift, thinking that the mountain's clear. But about halfway up, the group's chair comes to a sudden stop and they don't realize it yet, but they're now trapped 50 feet in the air in the freezing cold and no one is coming to save them.
Pause. Okay, and this right here is exactly why real skiers never say that it's their last run. These 3 are slowly about to realize that they're completely screwed, and they would never be in this situation if they hadn't insisted on going up one last time. They were so focused on getting their money's worth that they trusted their lives to a guy they hardly knew. And if he's willing to break the rules to let them in, then he's not exactly the most trustworthy person in the first place. By now, the entire mountain was closed, meaning they'd be up there all alone. And on top of that, he tried to warn them that bad weather is on the way. Getting stuck in a blizzard on top of a mountain can easily be a death sentence for anyone who isn't a trained survival expert, and personally, I'd rather go home early than never go skiing again. Now they're stuck on the side of the mountain with no sign of help on the way, and it's only a matter of hours before things can turn deadly. Normally we'd be concerned about water first because you can only survive up to 3 days without it. The good news is that they can just drink the icicles, but the bad news is that the cold is going to kill them first. The ski resort is located somewhere on the mountains of New England, and it has an elevation of 5,000 feet. During the winter, the average nighttime temperature at that height ranges from about 10 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. But on very cold nights or during storms, it can easily drop to below 0. These areas are also affected by fast winds, and with the wind chill, the felt temperature can drop even lower, meaning that to them, it's going to feel like minus 20 degrees. The human body just isn't meant to survive in these conditions, and prolonged exposure to the freezing temperatures can quickly lead to hypothermia. In as little as an hour, the cold can drop their core temperatures so low that they go unconscious and eventually die. Exposed skin, like their face and hands, will also be threatened by frostbite, which only takes minutes to set in, and can get so bad that they end up losing an entire limb. Their gear offers some protection for the daytime conditions, but they're not prepared to endure sub-zero temperatures all night long. With that being said, the best thing they can do right now is huddle up for warmth, just like the penguins in Antarctica. The reason why this works is because sharing body heat is one of the most effective ways to prevent hypothermia. By grouping together and using their hats and scarves to cover up as much exposed skin as possible, they can take turns yelling and use their ski poles to wave around reflective gear high in the air, which should hopefully get someone's attention. The group could easily hike to the lodge if they could get down, but they're trapped 40 or 50 feet in the air. Trying to get down on their own could be dangerous, so for now they need to stay huddled together while they signal for help and save the more desperate options for later.
At first, they think it's just an ordinary shutdown, and Joe starts cracking some jokes to pass the time. For some reason, Dan starts imagining the worst ways to die and says that his biggest fear is being eaten by wild animals. Not in a sudden way like in a shark attack, but knowing that you were about to be torn apart by a ferocious beast. His friends have other ideas. Parker thinks it's burning to death, and Joe thinks it'd be falling into the Sarlacc pit from Star Wars. And now they understand why he still doesn't have a girlfriend. Just when they're starting to wonder what's taking so long, that's when the lights all over the mountains suddenly go out, and they realize that something must have gone wrong. Parker instantly starts freaking out, convinced that the workers must have forgotten them. But the boys aren't ready to panic just yet. The lifty should know that they're still up there, so the only explanation that Dan can come up with is that there must have been a power outage. He's hoping that someone will come to their rescue, and if not, he says that he'll just jump down. But soon, he's going to realize that they're absolutely cooked. The more that Parker starts to panic, the more awkward things get as Dan keeps telling her to calm down. That's when they remember that it is Sunday, and the mountain is only open on weekends, which means that they could be stuck up here all freaking week. The boys reassure her that it could never happen, but the truth is that they're still living in denial. Deciding to take matters into her own hands, the girl just starts screaming into the darkness for help. But things get even worse when a massive storm appears in the sky. Joe says that he needs to take a whiz, but Parker yells at him for messing with the safety bar, saying how she feels much better with it down. Just when he's about to let it go, the clouds start dumping huge amounts of snow straight on their heads, and the wind picks up until it's like thousands of little icicles stinging against their faces. But there's nothing they can do besides sit there and huddle together for warmth. A while passes with them just waiting for some help, when all of a sudden, the bright beam of a headlight illuminates the snow. It's a worker and a snowcat driving right under the lift, and it looks like this could be their chance to escape. Or, at least, that's what they think. The group starts yelling for help when he comes to a stop right underneath them, but the worker still hasn't noticed them yet. Inside, he gets a call over the radio that the employee he was going to pick up doesn't need a ride anymore, so he puts it in reverse and starts heading back to the lodge. Panicking, the group starts dropping skis and other gear in front of the vehicle, but every time that he turns to look, he just so happens not to see anything. The others start waving and screaming as they try to get his attention, but there's nothing that they can do as their only hope of rescue turns and drives away, leaving them stranded here on the mountain once again.
Okay, pause. Man, talk about blowing it. This guy was their last hope at getting out of here alive, and there's absolutely no way that I'd be letting him just drive off without noticing us. As soon as he came to a stop, they literally stopped yelling and just sat there thinking that the day was saved. But if it were me, I wouldn't have been satisfied until I saw him get out of the vehicle and use his radio to call for some help. The group had tons of options here for what they could have done differently. First, it doesn't cost them any resources to just start yelling, but they need to make sure he can hear them over the sound of his engine. To give them the best chances, they all should have coordinated to yell as loud as they could at the same time, and kept doing that over and over again until he noticed. By shouting together, this would boost the sound of their three voices instead of canceling each other out. He might not have looked up high enough to see them, but the shine from his headlights was brightening up the entire side of the hill. In that moment, they should have taken a reflective surface like Joe's goggles and tied them to one of the ski poles, dangling them down in front of the man's view. The reflection of the light would be impossible for him to miss, and they'd be on their way back to the lodge for some blankets and hot cocoa in no time. The last resort is to just start throwing, but you don't want to wait until he's already driving away. Joe's skis happened to be shaped a lot like a javelin, so as soon as he came to a stop under the lift, I would have thrown one of those down with the power of Thor straight onto the roof of his vehicle, so that there was no way he could possibly miss us. Now, with the weather coming in and no one coming back to the mountain for a whole week, there's no chance that they can survive out here for that long. It's just not gonna happen. This means they're going to have to find a way down from this lift on their own, and I've got a few ideas for how they might do that, but let's see what ideas they come up with first.
Hours go by before the storm finally stops, dropping the temperature so low that icicles start forming on the chair. Joe here is still trying to distract them with jokes, but the reality is slowly setting in that nobody's coming to save them. And that's when Dan decides that it's time for a new plan. Knowing that they cannot survive up there all week, he decides that their only hope is if one of them jumps and goes for help. But there's no guarantee that they'll even survive the fall. Parker takes off a glove and accidentally drops it into the snow, and that's when her boyfriend notices that she's getting frostbite on her face. It's the last sign that he needs to go for it, and he pushes up the safety bar, getting ready to make the jump. His friends try telling him to just wait a little longer, but he's fully convinced that it's their only hope to survive. And after admitting that he's actually terrified, he unbuckles his board and jumps off of the chair. In a second, Dan plummets dozens of feet straight down, with the bones shattering straight through his skin the moment that he hits the ground. Damn, son. Sitting up, he's horrified to discover that both of his legs are completely destroyed, and now it looks like he won't be going for help anytime soon. Shouting to the others that he can't move, Parker starts getting ready to jump down there and save him, but he warns her to stay on the chair no matter what happens. Screaming in agony, there's nothing he can do but start yelling for some help, but at this point, there's no one for miles around. Parker tries tossing him a scarf to stop the bleeding, but she misses the throw and it gets stuck in a tree. That's when Joe throws down his instead, and it lands at the edge of Dan's feet. But his legs are so mangled that it's almost impossible to reach it. Struggling through the pain, he's finally able to reach over and grab it, using the scarf to painfully tie off his leg like a tourniquet. He uses the string from one of his gloves to get to the other one, but if he's thinking that his troubles are over, he's in for a big surprise. Looking up, Joe gets the idea that he might be able to climb along the cable and get down somewhere else. The only problem is he's not exactly the most athletic dude, and the cables are extremely sharp. He's nervous that he won't be able to make it, but Dan reassures him that he only needs to reach a pole and climb down the ladder. It seems like their best chance for survival, so Joe nervously agrees to give it a try. But that's when they hear something howling in the woods all around them. It's a pack of wolves, and Dan starts begging his friends to please save his life, worried that his worst fears are about to come true. Parker tries to distract him with a joke, but her boyfriend is absolutely terrified. But Joe here starts getting ready to make the climb. Nervous, he tries standing up on the back of the chair, but almost slips off right away because it's covered with ice. Their only option is to clear it off, sending the chunks falling down on top of Dan's head. And when he looks up, he suddenly realizes that he's face to face with a big-ass wolf.
Okay, pause. Oh, my boy. Who let the dogs out, am I right? Now, before we get into his options here, I think that it's important to point out that this is 100% his own fault. I mean, just look at that form when he jumped off the lift. He just cannonballed off there without a moment's hesitation, like he was jumping off the diving board at the town pool. And he was really looking at a 50-foot drop down onto hard-packed snow. The average breaking point for leg bones like the femur, tibia, and fibula is about 4,000 to 5,000 newtons of force, but that's only equal to a fall from about 10 to 12 feet under ideal conditions. This guy was dropping from at least 4 times that, and it doesn't take a degree in human anatomy to predict that jumping from that height is not going to end well. What he needed to do was lower himself as close to the ground as possible before making the jump. Joe could have held onto his snowboard and used it to lower Dan down. This way, they'd be able to get him a lot closer to the ground before he fell. I mean, it's not a perfect plan, but it's much better than just sending it and hoping for the best like he did. As if shattering both of his legs weren't bad enough, it looks like Dan here just made a new friend, an adult gray wolf. These puppies are the largest species of wolves in the world, regularly reaching over 100 pounds and nearly 6 feet from nose to tail. They have a bite force strong enough to crush bones and can maintain speeds of over 20 miles per hour even over long distances, making them one of the only predators that humans can't beat when it comes to endurance. Dan isn't going anywhere with 2 broken legs, which means that their only choice is to stand their ground. So here is exactly what they need to do. Because he's injured, the wolves are going to see Dan as easy prey, but since they're pack hunters, they naturally respect other well-organized groups. With that being said, the others need to start shouting and throwing objects down at the wolf to try and scare it off. Dan can reach behind him and grab his snowboard, which he can use as both a weapon and a shield to defend vital areas like his neck. The first wolf is most likely just a test to see how strong they are, so even if he scares it away, he needs to be prepared in case they come back. The good news is that Parker has a lighter, and if she throws it down to Dan, he can use any combustible materials they have to try and start a fire. If he can get one going, then not only will this keep him warm, but it will act as a smoke signal and naturally scare away the wolf pack, helping him stay alive until they can get rescued.
Dan just sits there terrified as the wolf snarls down at him, knowing that he has no chance to escape. Luckily, Parker throws her snowboard down just at the last second, frightening the wolf as it runs off into the trees. They can still hear it howling in the distance, so they know that it's not gone yet, but it seems like their friend is safe, at least for now. Dan here is grateful just to be alive, but he's terrified that the animals might come back at any minute. His friends on the lift aren't doing much better, and Parker's frostbite is quickly getting worse. So they decide that their only hope is for Joe here to give climbing down another shot. Nervous, he climbs on top of the chair and reaches up to grab the cable, but his feet slip out before he's mentally prepared. It's a long way between him and the next chair, and the razor-sharp cable starts tearing straight through his gloves. But he only makes it a few feet before everything changes. Hearing a noise in the trees, he makes the mistake of looking down, but it's not the fall that scares him. Inching backwards, he quickly gets back on the chair without explaining what's wrong. And when Parker looks down, she's horrified to see that the wolves have come back. This time, it's an entire pack of growling wolves circling around Dan, and all 3 of them know that he's absolutely f***ed. Terrified, he pulls down his hat over his eyes and shouts up at Joe not to let his girlfriend look as the wolves close in. All of a sudden, they start brutally tearing him to pieces right in front of his friends. All while there's nothing they can do but listen to his screams. It's a horrifying way to go as he's brutally eaten alive, and when the screaming finally stops, the wolf pack lets out a bone-chilling howl to celebrate their kill. That makes 1 skier down with 2 more to go.
Okay, pause.
Damn, Daniel. I gotta say, I think this proves you were right all along. Being eaten alive by wild animals really is the scariest way to die. Your friends came here to try out their skis, but now they're all leaving with PTSD. And as for you, there's only one thing left to say. Dan, my man, it looks like you f***ed up. I think the most embarrassing part about all of this is that it only happened because you're a broke boy who couldn't afford to pay for his own ticket. Damn. Get your weight up. If you had just forked over the extra cash, you could have been skiing all day with a regular lift ticket and never had to worry about pulling all those shady moves. But instead, you made your poor girlfriend flirt with the lifty as if that's not awkward as hell, and then turned around and get mad at her for giving him too much? Pick a struggle, dude. You got your runs in and you had a decent time, and you could have gone home happy right then and there, but no. We need to take one last run even though the mountain is literally shutting down, and the guy told you that there is a blizzard coming at any second. I mean, how stupid can you possibly be? After the lift got stuck, it's bad enough that it took hours of arguing with your girlfriend for you to accept that this was really a life or death situation. And when you finally decided to do something about it, this was your master plan? What in the actual peanut butter f*** were you thinking, my guy? Did you suddenly forget that you don't have Wolverine's adamantium skeleton? Maybe try lowering yourself down just a little before you absolutely go down a 50-foot drop onto your ankles. Honestly, you were probably dead from that crash even before the wolves came, but them showing up was just Mother Nature herself coming through to put the last nail in your coffin. I can tell you one thing, Liam Neeson would have pulled the broken bones out of his own legs and used them like nunchucks in a situation like this, but you clearly didn't have that dog in you, and now I guess the dogs have you in them. Sorry, Dan, but you just f***ed up. Heartbroken, Parker screams in rage over her boyfriend's death, but there's nothing they can do besides sit there in silence and think about where it all went wrong. Joe eventually mentions that the cable ripped through his gloves, but she honestly doesn't care that much about his safety right now. She's more frustrated that he let Dan take the risk when they knew it was too far of a fall. But Joe points out that jumping was his own idea in the first place. Plus, she didn't try to stop him either. So, if anything, they're both equally as much to blame. These two had been best friends their whole lives, so what happened hurts Joe just as much. But things get tense when Parker says that he should have been the one to try instead. Joe argues back that they would have never even been in this situation if it wasn't for her tagging along, and it's enough to make Parker finally break down in tears. But when she starts to cry, they finally realize that they're both being assholes. Their only hope of surviving this is if the two of them stick together, so they huddle up for warmth and try to come up with a new plan. With nothing to do but pass the time, they go back to remembering that girl Shannon's phone number, all while Joe here fantasizes about marrying her one day and starting a family together. It might be a little too soon to joke about his bright future while Parker's boyfriend is lying dead in a ditch, but at least they're looking at things from the positive side for once. They argue for a while about the name that he'd picked for his dog, as if Dan didn't just get eaten by a dog a few minutes ago, but this reminds Parker about her own puppy back at home. She starts getting sad at the thought, worried that the dog will starve before anyone finds her. But Joe reassures her that the neighbors will hear her barking. He seems to think that it won't matter anyway, because they're both getting out of this alive. At least they're staying optimistic, but for now, all that they can do is huddle up and try to get some sleep. It's already after sunrise by the time the two of them wake up, but they've both been outside for hours, and the cold didn't go away while they were sleeping. Parker wakes up first, but when she opens her eyes, the first thing that she sees is her gloveless hand. It's turned as white as a skeleton, and her palm is frozen solid straight to the metal safety bar. Unable to move her fingers, she has to painfully tear off the entire layer of skin just to get her hand free, forcing her shoulder up 1 inch at a time until it finally rips loose. Looking at her palm, she sees that it's completely torn to shreds, and the noise of her yelling finally wakes up Joe. As for him, it seems like he got off lucky, and he hoped it was all just a bad dream. But one look at Parker shows that the danger is still very real, and she's already in really bad shape. The frostbite on her face has gotten much worse, and by now, Parker can't even feel it. Worried, she reaches up to touch the scab, but he warns her not to do it, saying that the skin will peel right off if she does. They notice that Joe is getting frostbite too, and he promises that he'll get them both to a hospital before it's too late. But right now, it looks like they're stuck in the same position as before.
Pause. They managed to survive the night, but with the way that things are going, I wouldn't expect them to last for too much longer. On the bright side, at least it's daylight now. This means warmer temperatures and a much better chance that someone might come along. Yeah. The first thing that I would do now is go back to shouting for help once every minute or so. I mean, it doesn't cost them anything besides a little bit of energy, and if you're really lucky, then someone might just hear you. They can also tie a piece of brightly colored fabric to the ski pole, like a ripped section from Parker's jacket, and wave it around in the air like a flag. Since they have a lighter, it couldn't hurt to check their pockets for any flammable materials and try to get a fire going, since the smoke might get someone's attention. The only problem is they can't just sit here and wait forever. They probably won't survive another night, so now that it's daytime, they need to get back to working on their escape plan. We saw how Dan's plan of jumping worked out for him, but trying to climb along the cable doesn't seem that much better. If they're sticking with the plan of jumping down, they need to use all of the tools at their disposal for the best chance possible. They don't have much to work with, but what they do have is Joe's ski pole. On average, these things are about 4 to 5 feet long and can withstand a force of about 150 pounds before they start to bend. Parker here is in bad shape, but she's also the lightest of the two, so this is what they might want to try. Joe needs to lie down with his feet locked behind the chair, so that his waist is at the edge of the seat and his torso is dangling over. He hangs over the edge with the ski pole in his hands and stretches his arms out as far as he can. While he holds on, Parker uses him like a human ladder to lower herself down, holding on until she gets to the very bottom of the ski pole. Then with her arms stretched out as far as they can go, they can actually get her about 20 feet closer to the ground before she falls. The key from here is to fall with her knees bent slightly and her arms tucked in close to her body. When she hits the ground, she needs to allow her body to go into a roll, distributing the force across her whole body instead of just her ankles. If she does it right, then she might be able to avoid a serious injury. And then all she has to do is run down the hill and get some help.
Joe's hopeful that the start of a new day could mean that help is coming, either from a maintenance worker who happens to come by or when somebody back home notices that they are missing. He tries shouting for help, but it seems like no one can hear them, so he goes back to the idea of climbing down one of the poles. Worried, Parker isn't ready to watch another friend die just yet, and she talks him into waiting for help for just a little longer. A few more hours pass by with no sign of anyone coming, and Parker still hasn't gone to the bathroom since they first got stuck. She starts to cry from embarrassment when she can't hold it in any longer, but when she reaches up to wipe away her tears, she accidentally peels off a big chunk of her frostbitten skin. Meanwhile, Joe here quickly falls back to sleep. After hours of baking in the sunlight, Parker asks why he's never had a serious girlfriend, and Joe admits that he actually did once during his first year at college. They connected on all the same music and movies, and he felt like their relationship was meant to be, but he still hasn't told her yet why they actually broke up. In the end, it turned out that she was more interested in another guy. One day while they were having lunch in the cafeteria, he noticed her making glances at the guy behind his back. As he looked around, he realized that everyone in the place was clowning on him hard, and he broke up with her out of pure embarrassment. He regrets not standing up for himself now, and the worst part is that she's been going out with the other guy ever since. The conversation brings up bad memories of what happened to Dan, and Joe decides to tell a funny story to help Parker feel better. When they were much younger, Dan was an unpopular kid who was terrified on his first day of school. Their teacher told him to sit with a friend, and he pointed out Joe even though they didn't know each other. other, but after that day, the two of them were best buddies ever since. Refusing to let his friend die in vain, Joe decides that he's going for the pole one last time. Gathering up his courage, he quickly climbs on top of the chair and grabs onto the cable, but as he goes, he accidentally knocks a bolt loose, causing the whole lift to dangle by a thread. Now he really needs to make the climb, so he starts going one hand at a time, all while the cables tear through his skin with every inch. And as if things weren't bad enough already, that's when the wolves come back for another meal. Looking down, they realize that the wolf pack is just waiting for one of them to fall, and Joe's only choice is to keep going until he finally reaches the next chair. It's a close call, but even after he gets there, he still has a bit further to go, and the wolves are gathered around at the bottom. Needing a weapon, he tells Parker to throw a pole his way so he can use it to defend himself, but the chair is so shaky that it messes up her throw, and it ends up landing a lot farther away than they had hoped. With no other choice, Joe painfully shimmies along the next section of cable until he eventually makes it to the ladder. He's relieved just to have made it this far, but there's still a long way to go before they're finally safe. Climbing down to the bottom, the wolves surround him as soon as he touches the ground, and by the time that he reaches for the ski pole, it's already too late. One of the animals tears into his arm, but he manages to fight it off with a stab to the neck, and gets to his feet just as the rest of the wolf pack closes in. Rushing for a snowboard, he sits down on it like a sled and takes off down the mountain with all the wolves chasing after him, leaving Parker behind to wait for help all alone.
Okay, I hope Joe here's a really good sledder, otherwise I wouldn't plan on seeing him in the sequel. But thanks to his sacrifice, Parker might actually have her best chance yet at escape. We've just seen firsthand that climbing across the cable is possible, and even with her injured hand, it's still better than sitting there waiting to die. If she decides to go for it, Parker can use some cloth like her hat or scarf to wrap up her injured hand as she tries to make it across the cable. That definitely won't be easy, but might be her only option. Otherwise, she'll have to try falling down with the chair herself. Now that the bolt is loose, she can rock it back and forth until the entire chair falls off. This happened at a ski resort in Maine back in 2010, where a chairlift fell off the cable and plummeted 30 feet to the ground. 8 people were injured, but luckily there were no fatalities. If she lies down on the cushion, she can use the structure of the chair to absorb most of the impact. Obviously, they're not designed for this, but it could be better than dropping with nothing to break the fall. Either way, once she gets to the ground, she needs to quickly grab her snowboard and the extra ski pole, and use them to defend herself if she runs into trouble. Luckily, the wolves already had 2 good meals, and if she acts quickly, she can use Joe as a meat shield while she escapes.
Hours go by, with Parker just sitting there waiting for help, and when she looks down, she sees pieces of her boyfriend's body lying there in the snow. Eventually, she falls asleep, and when she finally wakes up, she realizes that it's already the next morning. By now, she's on the verge of death from frostbite, and with so much time having passed, it looks like Joe probably didn't make it. When she looks up, she notices that the bolt is dangerously loose, and it's only a matter of time before the whole chair plummets down to the slope. The girl starts to panic, wondering how she can possibly get out of this, until she finally decides that she has to try and jump. Just as she's lowering herself down, the bolt suddenly comes loose and the whole chair drops straight towards the ground. Luckily, the cable holds out long enough to break her fall, but it eventually snaps, causing her to drop the rest of the way. The chair crashes directly onto her ankle, snapping the bones and trapping her foot underneath, but she's able to pull it out and starts army crawling her way to freedom. Sliding down the hill like a penguin, she eventually reaches a clearing in the trees, where she's horrified to discover a brutal sight. The wolves are less than 5 feet away, and they're busy feasting on what's left of Joe. That makes 2 riders down with only 1 more to go. But luckily, it looks like these puppies are already full, and she uses him as a literal meat shield to get past without any trouble. Staggering to the bottom, she finally makes it to civilization just as a car is coming past. But somehow the driver doesn't see her and she passes out right there on the side of the road. Sometime later, a minivan comes back and almost runs her over, but this time the driver finally pulls over, lifting her into the car and rushing her straight to the hospital. That makes 2 riders down with 1 survivor. And in the end, it looks like the bunny hill would have been safer after all.
Frozen 2010. I mean, god the were these kids thinking? I guess it was their own fault? Yeah, sounds about right. Anyways, let me know down in the comments if you guys would have done anything differently in this scenario. Leave a like and subscribe, and check out that How to Beat playlist for more videos just like this one. We post on Wednesdays and Saturdays. I'm the guy. I'll see you in the next video, and have a damn good day.